Hello, everyone, and welcome to NorthStar Community Talk for this week. And appreciate all of you being here with us. And we continue to be excited about how we're reaching out and sharing the good news of recovery. And so it's as we know, recovery is very difficult. Recovery can be frustrating. It can be maddening. It can be heartbreaking. But when we live with addiction, when we continue to destroy our lives and those around us with all of our addictive behaviors, our addictive thinking, this certainly is a better way to go. But always remember, I always tell people this, relapse is part of recovery. If you're someone who's on here that's really saddened and frustrated because you relapsed again, don't worry about it. Do the things you need to do and keep moving forward. Is remember, we break addiction into three categories: substances, compulsive behaviors, and people. So I can promise you, someone the other day was asking me, he says, now how often do people relapse at NorthStar? And I said, well, everyone's relapsed at some point. But for the substance, for you guys out there that are substance addicts to substances, pretty good record. We're doing pretty good, not relapsing. Everybody has, but it's been a while for people who are coming, which makes those of us who are substance abusers, they're a little bit down the road now. They can be so helpful to any of you that are new at that. But we kind of were saying it with humor, but true is the compulsive behaviors and the people are addicted to compulsive behaviors and relationships, difficult relationships, things like that. Is a lot of relapse goes on there because it's not so deadly. Sometimes it's small. Sometimes it's not as easy to see. But yeah, there's a lot of relapse when we start talking about, things there. Because, for instance, if you say, I'm not going to spend money on whatever, and I go out and do that, well, the world probably hasn't ended. You haven't, got out and driven with alcohol in you and things like that. But you still have been addictive. You did it because you were trying to reduce your emotional pain, and for a moment it probably did that. But then the problem is it probably added to your shame. So we always got to remember, addictive behavior is habitual behavior to avoid pain, right? And so we have to understand, for a lot of us, that it's the excitement of the act of doing something creates some of the problems in us. Like if I'm, let's say that I'm, Facebook on me on social media, but I've made a commitment that I'm going to not be on social media. Just the anticipation of getting my phone out and I'm going to scroll to something to see it, that my dopamine goes up, and so I feel a little better, just the anticipation. And then I get out there and I do the social media, and of course I collapse, and I'm now, instead of for 1 minute looking, I'm now on my second hour. Then my shame goes up and my pain goes up. So we're doing things to reduce our pain, emotional pain, and then when we do the addictive stuff, it increases our pain, and thus we're in our cycle, and we just keep going on and on and on. And it just, again, step one is my life became unmanageable and I became powerless to overcome whatever it is I'm addicted to or addictions to. And let's be honest, for many of us, we probably hit two of the three, or three of the three, or at least one of the three. But we can be addicted to compulsive behaviors and substances. We can also be addicted to compulsive behaviors and people. We can be addicted to substances and people. You get the point. But what we just have to accept that addiction is not what we want. It's a destructive way to live. It's disheartening. It takes us away. It takes away our spirituality, our emotional life, our physical life, well-being. I mean, it is truly a disease of a physical, emotional, and spiritual disease, and it robs us so much of our life. We refuse to connect with people. We don't stay with people. We create problems for ourselves. We harm others around us. And some of us, our addictions, are not as catastrophic as others, but they're still addictions, and they still are impairing our lives, and they're keeping us from a rich, full, meaningful life where we have purpose, we have connection, we have love, we have interest, we're part of something bigger than ourselves, we live with gratitude, all those things. We don't have that when we're living addictively. It's impossible to do. And, again, I always think about that psychiatrist would ask what he saw in people that made them having a rich, full, meaningful life. The two things he said was people have something in their life that's bigger than them, in a positive way, by the way, and they live with gratitude. Can't do that when you're addicted. You do have something bigger in your life than you, and it's your addiction, but that's also very self-centered, and it's very destructive. And so you get the point there. So David probably wrote this, Psalm 51, when we're talking about overcoming toxic shame. Generous in love, God give grace. Huge in mercy, wipe out my bad record. Scrub away my guilt, soak out my sins in your laundry. I know how bad I've been. My sins are staring me down. Now that is someone who's starting to understand things aren't going well. You're the one I violated, and you've seen it all, seen the full extent of my evil. You have all the facts before you. Whatever you decide about me is fair. I've been out of step with you for a long time, in the wrong since before I was born. What you're after is truth from the inside out. Enter then, conceive a new, true life. So you can see that's where we need to be. And the point is that we've all made mistakes. We've all done things we shouldn't have. We've harmed others. We've harmed ourselves. We've lied. We've stolen. We've cheated. We've used. You name it. God doesn't care. God loves us. God just wants us to back in good graces with Him. It's all He asks for. And toxic shame is so destructive, and that's why we need to continue to understand it, because once you start understanding shame, toxic shame, maybe it won't have so much power over us. Because I promise you, I've said this a lot, and I say it in our group meetings a lot, is I know why you're here. Your stated reason is you're addicted to people, or you can't stop spending, or you can't stop looking at pornography, you can't stop whatever it is, or I can't stop using cocaine, or I can't stop drinking. The point is, in many ways, what we're really addicted to is our toxic shame. We just loathe ourselves. We see ourselves as so low, and we see other people doing so much better, and yet we resent other people, resent ourselves. Toxic shame is a deep-rooted sense of inadequacy. I mean, that's a great quote. And it's just that it's like we have shame that is necessary for us to be healthy, and that is when I when I use again, or when I do something harmful to myself or to others, I feel bad about that. That's what we need, because then the shame's purpose is to get us not to do something again that harms us or others. So that's important. But toxic shame, what is, we go the next step and we just say that we are a total failure, that we are loathsome, we are unlovable, all that stuff. That is not true, but it feels true to us, and that's why addiction becomes so, in some ways, what we see, at least in the short term, is beneficial. Again, how many of us, I hear over and over, we talk about, I just never felt like I was like everyone else. I felt I was different. Well, maybe what was making you feel so different was your toxic shame. Was it how you felt about you, and how you assumed everybody was better than you, how you assumed that everybody else had more together than you, they were smarter than you, or if you did something good, it was an accident, or you didn't deserve it, or it wasn't enough no matter what you did. I mean, you get the point. And so the problem with toxic shame is we internalize it, and we just take it and we just bludgeon ourselves with it, and we just are so mean to ourselves. And so there's three things that we have to understand about toxic shame, and that is, we have atrophy thinking. So you've heard that about atrophy of your muscles. If you don't use your muscles get small and they get weak and they don't work, right? Well, atrophy thinking is kind of the same thing. we over and over criticize ourselves. We over and over we judge ourselves. Our atrophy thinking becomes a mental health issue, and it makes us weaker. It makes our character less strong. It makes like addictive behaviors more attractive to us. And it's just that we kind of get where we automatically shame ourselves, and we magnify that shame to points that aren't real. One of the things we always talk about is if we were as graceful and loving towards others as we were to ourselves, how much healthier we'd be. We will let other people hurt us, abuse us, whatever, and we forgive them, but we don't do that for ourselves. And so that's part of our atrophy thinking. We're just never enough. I mean, we're just not good, and everybody needs to get that. So then the next part of shame is we see ourselves as never enough. It doesn't matter what you do, how well you do it, how fast you do it, how great you do it, how bad you do it, you're never enough. It just isn't you just can't live with that. You try to be good, but you can only be mediocre at best. If you rise above mediocrity, you get uncomfortable. I've seen people who are very high over functioning people. I mean, the things they achieve is amazing, but you know what? They still never see it as enough. They still see themselves as mediocre, and they don't enjoy the ride. You can be one of the smartest people on the planet. You could do all these great things, but if you have toxic shame, you don't internalize the sense of well-being. You don't internalize a sense of achievement. All you do is see yourself as never enough. Never enough. It's a hard way to go, and we understand this. A lot of us are. We know this. We live it, right? And then the other thing is that not only are we never enough, but so instead of probably kind of combine ours with the mediocrity. So we're never enough. We expect nothing but mediocrity, and we beat ourselves up all the time. How's that for oh happy day? But you know what? We're not God. We have to get this through our thick skulls. We are not God. Many of us have stuff from our past that created so much of this. When you're being abused as a child, when you're being neglected as a child, when you're being ignored, all things, you take that on yourself that there's something wrong with you, that you're the problem. If your parents is a workaholic and they're never home, they love you, but you don't ever hear that as a child. Somewhere you're going to start figuring out you're the problem. And that's how your shame gets created. And then you start living that shame, you start believing that shame, and then you start doing all sorts of things. And one of the things that probably needs to be discussed a little bit here, I'll briefly talk about this, is one of the problems when we have toxic shame is we don't live with limits. Now, we do have the major limit that we're never enough, and mediocrity is the most we should ever expect. But the problem with toxic shame is that, when we feel shame, the shame we deserve when we've done something wrong, we feel limits, right? If I go out and I spend $500 on something and then I don't have money after that, that's shame. I feel shame for that, and that's a limit to me. I shouldn't have done that. Now I got problems with money, right? So without shame, we don't have limits. But the problem is that when we have way too much shame, when we have toxic shame, it leads us to live limitlessly at times. I mean, how many of you, and we talk about this with the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey, where there's that just amazing statistic and troubling one, is that without intervention, if you score a 6 or more on the ACE score, which means you've had a lot of abuse in your life, you've had a lot of trauma, you will die on average 20 years younger than someone who scores a 0 or 1 on the ACE. Think about that. Well, this is where the limit thing comes in, because how many of you out there, you didn't say I'm going to go kill myself, but you lived recklessly, you drank too much, you fought too much, you drove too fast, you did things that could have killed you, but it didn't. But so people a lot of times people say, I never wanted to kill myself, but I wouldn't have been sad if I would have. And so that's what happens, is that's living without limits, when we live with this recklessness and this out of control behaviors, and we just create so many problems, and we're looking for things, and we're angry and resentful. Those are the things that give us so much trouble. Because again, with toxic shame, I believe I'm flawed as a person. The limits I have on myself are mediocrity, but I can do lots of things destructively with no limits, right? Use too much, spend too much time in compulsive behaviors, get in reckless, painful, destructive relationships. Those are things we do when we're toxic shame. And we got to remember that shame becomes our core identity, and it gives us a sense of failing and falling. That's a pretty way of putting that. And so either we stifle ourselves to where we don't do anything, which I've seen with people with a lot of toxic shame, or we live with bravado and insanity. But both of those, we're just not allowing ourselves to be ourselves, because our toxic shame is just so big in us. And the fact is that we're human, and we do make mistakes. We do things wrong. We do things we shouldn't. We do all those things. But it's part of being human. And the problem is, when we have toxic shame, we don't allow ourselves that thought. We don't see ourselves making a mistake. We see ourselves as the mistake. And that's a hard way to live. And many of us know that, right? And it isn't what we've done or not done. It's how we've interpreted what we have done. And when we're in toxic shame, we interpret it very globally, specifically bad, and that we are bad because we did it. And so how do we get past this? How do we do the things that we need to do? And how do we get past this thought of being worthless, and all these insecurities and all that stuff? And we have to figure out ways. You can't do this on your own. That's why we talk about rich, full, meaningful life, a life filled with purpose, filled with connection, filled with love, filled with goals, filled with happiness. Those are things that happens when we have rich, full, meaningful life. We don't talk to shame. We don't have stuff. We're surviving. We're getting by. We see purpose is like almost like, what do you mean purpose? Something bigger than me that's positive? I loathe myself. Nobody want to be around me. Nobody wants to hear from me. I don't deserve that. Or I go out and find really reckless, destructive people, and we try to kill ourselves altogether and do all the crazy stuff we do. But the two things, again, that we can do to help us get better, to help us on our recovery journey, is we have to get ourselves living with gratitude. Write down those things you're grateful for. Think about the things where other people have been grateful to you. Those are two biggies. You have to talk about your past trauma, and then you have to figure out ways to assign something good that came from that trauma. You may be more empathetic than you used to be. You may be able to hear other people more. You've been there to help others who were where you were when you first started out. So you have to live with gratitude. You have to be able to deal with your trauma, and you have to find something to be part of that's bigger than you. And that's where I think support groups are so good, because there you get a chance to go in and you can become big. You can do something that's bigger than you. You can help others. You can be part of a group. You can be that positive force to help not only you stay clean and sober and non-addictive, but the same for others. That's pretty big for you to be able to be healthy enough to be there for others. And it happens all the time. I hear all the time about how people at NorthStar out in their regular lives, maybe if some of them go to group, a lot of them, but they run into people, and somehow the people start sharing with them the pain and the misery they're going through, and we have a chance now to share that. That's something bigger than you. And one of the things we got to realize about shame that's important to understand is we have our brain kind of was split into, one side of it is logic, the other side's emotional. When we have a great deal of shame, there's a gate that runs, so there's a highway that runs between those two. So when we're at our best, we put logic to something, maybe a problem, but we also put the right emotions to it, right? But think about it, when we're in toxic shame and we're overwhelmed with toxic shame, we either become highly emotional without logic, or we become wildly logical and very cold and not emotional. We don't want to do that. We want the gate to be open between us. Well, guess what? When we have huge amounts of shame, the gate closes between the two brain sides. So now when we need to be at our best, we're at our worst, because now we are either very cold, emotionally distant, not trusting anyone, and very logical in a cold, methodical manner, or we become highly emotional, highly reactive, and highly non-logical, and we respond in ways that we shouldn't. So either way, it just doesn't work. So what we want, of course, is for us to have the gate open so we can have a free interstate running between the two brain sides. So we have to figure that out. And again, how we do that? We do it with gratitude. We do it with purpose. So again, we have to figure out ways when we're feeling really stressed, and we find ourselves being highly emotional, or we find ourselves as numb, find ourselves cold. Say to yourself, the gate has closed on the interstate, and I've got to get it open back up again. And we have to become aware of that. We have to be willing to trust God. We have to believe that we're forgiven. We have to find ways to understand that we are a good and decent person created by God. Easier said than done. You got to get yourself into support groups. You get yourself to professionals to help you get past this stuff, because you don't want to be powerless. You don't want to live your life embracing powerlessness. You don't want that. You want to be able to take action. You want to be able to do things you need to make yourself better, to get yourself to a rich, full, meaningful life. It can be done. You have to figure out ways. Some small things you can do. Make sure your hygiene's good. Make sure you're cleaning up around yourself. Put some order to your life. That's the logical side. The emotional side. Make sure you get to a support group and just listen to people. You don't even have to talk, but get around other people. Isolate. I don't care if you're introvert or extrovert. You cannot isolate all the time. That's you being highly emotional. You got to figure out ways to develop social contacts, social relationships that are healthy and meaningful and helpful to you. So again, we just have to find ways to overcome this. And maybe think about, I always think the greatest thing about NorthStar is knowing that everyone in there, as they continue on their journey and we get healthier and healthier, how it's just amazing that we get put in people's paths who are so desperately needing recovery, and we're there. That's God working. Those are things to look forward to, of getting past your own toxic shame. I just can't emphasize this enough. Toxic shame is not real. Toxic shame is not real. Toxic shame is not real. It is not based on reality. Yes, you've done some things you should be ashamed of. You've done some things wrong. We all have. Everybody has. It doesn't mean that you're inherently an internalized bad person filled with inadequacy and all that. It's not true. So I hope that we can at least acknowledge that. See the pain in your life, see the bad things that have happened to you, figure out ways to put gratitude to it, even if you have to force that. But it's so important. You can take the action you need to overcome this toxic shame. It doesn't have to be this way. So I really appreciate you listening. I know toxic shame is a hard subject, but it's so important. I think if we could get rid of toxic shame in our lives, our addictive levels are going to go way down to away. We've got to be able to figure out ways to let go of it. And it's not real. I hope you heard that again. So again, thanks for joining me. We do meet on Wednesdays and Fridays at 6:30 at Walnut Grove Baptist Church at 7046 Cold Harbor Road here in Mechanicsville, Virginia. If you're not local, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at csimpson@wgva.church. So don't be afraid to reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. And everything's confidential. For you that are local, if you come, we have childcare. We have meals. I mean, it's a good thing. And we want you here. You don't have to share anything you don't want to. We just want you to come here and feel the love of God, feel the love of Jesus Christ, see how others are getting their lives together, how others are struggling. We're all there together. because we want to get that ritual, meaningful life in our lives. So anyway, thanks for joining me, and I'm going to go ahead and close with a prayer of serenity today. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change and the courage to change the things I can, living it one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as a pathway to peace. Taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Trusting that Jesus will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever and the next. Amen. Again, thank you for joining, and have a great week, and hope to hear from you soon. Thank you.